I just shot a music video with one of the most expensive and best cameras in the world, and it didn't really work out as I planned. This is the ARRI ALEXA 35, a $70,000 powerhouse that is used to create most of the movies you watch in the cinema, HBO, Netflix, and wherever else. This camera offers technical perfection for every single frame that you capture, and for many filmmakers, me included, is the wet dream to one day own this very camera themselves. After all, the Alexa 35 is the most developed and compact and easy to use Alexa that ARRI has built to this day. At least while you're on a big set where there's a big crew around this camera. As soon as you try to use this camera as a single operator, you will quickly notice that framing up your shot while holding this brick of a camera and pulling focus all at the same time is pretty complicated. I know what you say. I'm here for the best possible image, so if I have the chance to shoot on an ARRI, I will break my back and suck it all up if that's what it takes. Yeah, I don't know, maybe that's just me though. That's exactly what I did for my latest music video, and the reason for it was a very simple question I had. Does this camera really make you a better filmmaker? And boy, did I learn a lot from this simple shoot. So for you to really understand the entire learning curve I went through and how this camera almost turned out to ruin the entire shoot, let's start right at the beginning. Now, you might be wondering, how did this Muppet afford to buy an ARRI ALEXA 35? Well, the answer is quite simple. I didn't, but my boss did. So for this video, I'm borrowing this camera from Popcorn Productions. And because I would like to use more than just one focal length, Nisi was kind enough to send over a set of 8 Athena lenses. And even though they look tiny on the Alexa, I would consider their size average, and the image they produce above average, but more on that later. Now, I have been on various projects where an ARRI ALEXA was used, but it was always been big projects, and I was also never the one to operate the Alexa myself. So I was wondering, for all these smaller single operator shoots that I'm doing for these kinds of videos, could my work be elevated by using a camera like this? This was less of a practical question than an experiment to me, and because we had just bought our very own Alexa 35 at Popcorn Productions, and I'm pretty much able to use it at any point for any project I want, why not just try it out? Coincidentally, a new album was just released by the talented artist and my good friend Kjells. If you haven't heard of him yet, you should really give Strange Times a listen. It is his debut solo album, and also his bachelor's thesis, which he passed summa cum laude. And as we have already made a handful of music videos together, it just made sense to just take one of his new songs and shoot a music video on the Alexa. And as always, even though we shot on the Alexa, we had no budget other than for a few pizzas, so our team was very limited. There was Kjells, of course, as the talent. Then we had Finn operating the behind-the-scenes camera, and FX6 also using the Nisi Athenas, Chris helping me with setting up the shots and the lighting, and me operating the Alexa, all by myself. But this was the whole point, and that's exactly how I wanted it. So how hard could this possibly turn out to be? The song itself feels very intimate and authentic, and our plan was to record a few performance shots in the studio where Kjells originally recorded and produced the entire album. That gets some more abstract shots at night in a forest, so the video switches up a bit and doesn't feel too monotone for the entire 5 minutes of the song. Immediately when we started setting up the shot in the studio, I noticed how much more we looked at the tiniest details of the image. And of course, with every passion project I do, I feel more and more hyper aware of how light falls onto the subject and the entire scene. But I do feel like using this $100,000 camera setup pushes you to create images that are worth it. Because when using a camera like this and the image looks bad, well, it's 100% your own fault. So while I was already rearranging the entire studio layout together with Kjells, Chris was already setting up the lights outside. We had an aperture 600D and 300D from the outside and diffused the 600D through this curtain, while the 300D was just straight on blasting into the studio without any modifiers. We quickly agreed that we wanted to try out a so-called SOV-HOB lighting, which stands for soft on face, hard on body. So we would use the hard light from the 300D outside to light Kjells' torso and also the space around him, but cut it off just below his face. Then we set up an f22 panel with additional diffusion to get some nice soft ramrod lighting on Kjells' face. Some finishing touches were some negative fill on the opposite side of his face, a small nanolight tube to catch some reflection on Kjells' hair and separate him from the background, as well as these 3 practicals behind him, even giving his face a bit of a warm kicker. Setting all this up took much longer than expected, around 2 to 3 hours, and I had to switch the 155 Wh B-mount battery on the Alexa twice already. This sure is a power-hungry beast. So I'm gonna use this, I think this is 1 terabyte. It's 960 gigabytes actually. I'm gonna put that in the camera. It's gonna give us 1.5 hours of shooting on open gate, 4.6K ProRes. So. Finally, we added some haze to the room and started to record some performing shots on the tripod. 2 using the widest lens in the set, the 14mm, 1 on the closest lens, the 135mm, and then I moved on to handheld with the 40mm. And I already started asking myself if I made a big mistake, because taking this setup handheld into the forest later might become more of a challenge than I anticipated. Well, it turns out that an ARRI Alexa is somehow always heavier than you expect, especially when trying to hold it still during a 5-minute song and while pulling focus yourself. So something that kind of saved my ass on this production were the Nisi Athenas. And sure, it looks weird using these kinds of lenses on this camera, but for the price and size of these lenses, I'm honestly super impressed by the image quality they deliver. As mentioned earlier, Nisi did send me a set of 8 Athenas for this video, and I will be able to use one of them. But that doesn't explain why I used them on this ARRI production in particular. Do they really do the camera justice? If you don't care for this chapter, feel free to skip to the next one. First of all, these lenses are built incredibly well and feel super dense in your hand. Just like any other higher end lens you would usually combine with an ARRI. They all share about the same weight, size and front diameter of 77mm, as well as the same gearing positions for aperture and focus and a 300-degree focus rotation, which made it really easy to swap them during the shoot, especially because I was using the DJI Focus Pro and the focus handle attached directly to the camera. And even though 77mm is a weird front diameter for high-end cinema lenses and the 14mm doesn't have the same filter size, this was no problem as the Alexa has internal NDs, so we didn't need to put any filter on anyway. If you want to use these lenses on something like a Morphage adapter, by the way, it doesn't really work because the back element of these lenses sticks out too far, so just keep that in mind. Overall, the compact size but professional grade build quality helped immensely to keep this camera setup to a minimum and allow us to shoot some handheld shots without using any support systems, even though I should have probably used one anyway. Despite their size and price, the image quality of the Nisis is fantastic and quite consistent across all 8 lenses. They have no visible focus breathing and very minimal chromatic aberration. Also, there is next to no distortion, even all the way on the 14mm. Most of the lenses in the set feature a t1.9 aperture. The exceptions are the 14mm with t2.4 and the 18 and 135 with t2.2. With an image circle of 46mm, they do also cover full frame. Something that throws me off on most lenses in this price category of around $1,000 are the flares. Most times these kinds of lenses look very high-end until they flare, and it just doesn't really look right. Sometimes it even looks a bit cheap. The Athenas, however, have really nice flares. They are very subtle and it's pretty hard to even get them to flare that much. But once you get to purposefully flare them, they have these very nice 3D rainbow flares that I think look awesome. On the Alexa 35, not only can we clearly see the sharpness of these lenses, but also the micro contrast they are able to render. While many vintage or budget lenses don't really give you an accurate contrast rendition, the Athenas are able to really render the contrast true to life, which makes the image look rich and leaves a lot of room for creative adjustments in the grading process. But more on how I graded the final footage from the Alexa 35 after this next chapter. When we finally arrived at the forest, it was already much later than I had planned, but I was pretty happy with all the performance shots that we had gotten in the studio. And as I had just filmed some similar shots with Media Division 1 week earlier, I knew that with a bit more light we could get some really cool shots. But of course, the plan was not bulletproof and also not necessarily rainproof. But the weather app was already warning us. Luckily, Chris had the brilliant idea to bring a pop-up tent where we could store all our gear, and we started setting up. we put the 600D as high as we could behind the trees and hooked it up to a giant echo flow that was simultaneously constantly charging the B-mount batteries. At this point I had already lost count of how many times I had already switched the B-mount batteries on this camera, and without the little SWIT hot swap plate that we had, I would have probably gone crazy just like shutting down and booting up the camera every single time. Now we had a lot of light, and I really wanted to get some haze in the forest, so we used our portable hazer and it looked epic. However, in order to see more than just the silhouette once Kjells is in the frame, we needed some more light from the front, and my idea was to use a practical light. Initially I wanted to use a torch, but that would have been a bit risky in the forest, so I found this petrol lamp at a hardware store. Now it's only a matter of combining all these elements together to get some really nice shots, but that was when things started falling apart. By the way, if you enjoy this kind of content, me breaking down and going more into detail on how I create high-end productions, subscribe, because later this year I'm gonna be taking on the biggest project I've done so far, and you might not want to miss out on that. But back to the forest. So we have a little problem because this lamp just died and we only got like 2 shots with it. Now we're kind of fucked. At the same time I felt how difficult it was to get the shots I had in mind by just holding the Alexa in my hand and trying to pull focus on a very dark image. And while the Alexa performed decently in the low light condition, it is not known to be the best low light camera. So we needed the fill light. I needed to come up with something quick that we could shoot without taking too much time and also works together with the footage we already had, because otherwise the whole shoot would have been completely pointless. So now we decided to just make one performance shot here without the lamp, and then I'll try to fix it in the edit. It's not ideal at all, but it's already 1:30 AM and we want to go home. For fill light we just set up the f/22 and a tube light, and to be able to connect the shots we got earlier, I just filmed Kjell holding up a matchstick towards the petrol lamp. We're done with our shoot. Wasn't exactly what I expected or I had planned, so that's a kind of unsatisfying wrap. But I mean, we technically got enough footage to cover the entire song, but now I'm really tired and we all really want to go home. I was just so frustrated because not only did we not get half of the shots that I had planned, but also I didn't even know if I could tie everything together nicely in the edit. But when I looked at the footage, at a time where I should have probably just went to bed to get at least a few hours of sleep, I was very relieved to see that the footage turned out really nice. And as I promised, here's a quick rundown of what I used to grade the footage from the Alexa 35. As you know, I'm a big fan of capturing a clean image and fine-tune the creative look in post, and the Nisi Athenas really allow me to do that. For the final result, I've added my own power grade optical drift, which is a drag and drop vintage lens emulation tool that you can get on my website. There's a full video about it in the info card. I also added FilmBox, a high-end film emulation tool that is used on many big productions like Everything Everywhere All at Once, for example. As you may know, I'm a big fan of Dehancer, another film emulation tool I've made videos about, but FilmBox, especially in combination with ARRI footage, is just next level shit. I mean, look at this. I just drag and drop it on the footage and it already looks amazing. A few tweaks and a bit of optical drift, honestly, that's all it needs. Of course, FilmBox is not the cheapest plugin out there, and I think it's even double the price than the Dehancer license, but it is also very good. And yes, in my opinion, far superior than Dehancer. But of course, both plugins are worth their price, and I have added links to both of them in the video description. This video is not sponsored by either of them, but I did get a free license for each of them for use in my videos. If you want to see a full video on this topic, leave a comment below. Now, to conclude, what have I learned from this entire project? Looking back, using the ARRI Alexa 35 on this music video almost ruined the entire production, not because it's a bad camera, but because I tried to fit a square peg into a round hole. It just really hammered home the point that the best camera in the world means nothing if it hinders your creative flow and limits your agility. Maybe the real goal shouldn't be to just get the ARRI, but to understand when and how to truly leverage its power, or when simply to choose the tool that lets you tell your story most effectively. If we would have used our behind the scenes cam, the Sony FX6, as the main cam for example, maybe we would have been more spontaneous and able to go with the unplanned changes, and we would have also had better low light performance and not been so dependent on a fill light. Of course, the ARRI footage itself looks much nicer with the smooth highlight roll-off and dynamic range. But we never really shot a high contrast scene anyway, and another camera could have also looked really good in these controlled lit environments. Ultimately, it feels amazing to work with an ARRI camera, but there is a reason why it is mostly used on big sets with big crews and big cranes. As long as you're a single operator on the run like me most of the times, there are many other cameras that are not only much cheaper, but also much more made for the job. Anyway, this was a fun experience, and thanks again to Kjell, Chris and Finn for helping me once again with this shoot, to Popcorn Productions and Apes for providing the gear, to Nikolas from Media Division to help me with the planning of this project, and finally to Nisi for providing the Athenas. If you want to see more content like this, subscribe, because I'm just getting started. Stay tuned for an amazing project later this year, and always keep in mind to choose the gear that helps your creative process the best. Bye.
Life can be so sweet, life can be so fine. That's how I choose to spend my time.